Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Jodi Rudoren, editor-in-chief of The Forward. We're going to give we have several hundred people registered for this event, so we're going to give people time to roll in before I introduce our great panel to talk about Israel's fourth election in 2 years and why this one might or might not be different from all the elections that have come before. Please, as you come in, we'd love you to post in the chat who you are, where you're calling in from, what your connection is to the Forward or to Israel or to the Jewish world in general. And as we go, you're welcome to post into the chat any comments you have about the conversation. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A button, which is not the chat button, to pose questions that you'd like me to ask our panelists, which we'll do throughout the event. If you are posting to the chat, I see that Leslie Strom and Jenna Karina have already jumped in, but you posted accidentally just to panelists. So please, when you're posting to the chat, go to all panelists and attendees so that your fellow audience members can also see you. Again, all panelists and attendees is how you post to the chat. And if you have a question, use the Q&A button. I'm very excited to announce that this event is co-sponsored by the Ruderman Foundation. And because of the Ruderman Foundation, we have with us Tracy Steele, who is captioning this event. If you would like to see the subtitles, you can look at the closed caption button on the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, and probably on the left if you're on a phone or tablet, and press that closed captioning button, and then it will come across with subtitles. This is our first time using the captioning, thanks to the generosity of the Ruderman Foundation. If anybody would like to fund us to have captioning at all our events, we would be thrilled. Once again, my name is Jodi Rudoren. I'm editor-in-chief of The Forward, and we're thrilled to welcome you to this conversation a day ahead of Israel's fourth and maybe final election for a while. We will see. We're going to get into it with our wonderful panelists. We have Yossi Klein Halevi from Jerusalem today. He's a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute and co-director of the Institute's Muslim Leadership Initiative, which teaches young American Muslim leaders about Judaism and about Israel. He is the author of the most important book you need to read about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or really Israel at all, Like Dreamers, my very favorite book about the area, and also the more recent New York Times bestseller, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor. Yossi, thanks for joining us. We also have Tamar Hermann, a public opinion expert at the Israel Democracy Institute. Tamar is a political science professor at the Open University in Ra'anana. She's calling in from Tel Aviv today, and she has been studying Israeli public opinion and polls and analyzing politics since the early 1990s. She will bring us up to date about everything we can learn about what Israelis are thinking as they head to the polls tomorrow. We also have Jay Ruderman, the president of the Ruderman Family Foundation, which focuses on strengthening the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community. As I said, the Ruderman Foundation has so generously allowed us to be able to caption this program. We're really happy about that. Jay is a lawyer who started as an assistant district attorney and then enlisted in the Israeli Defense Forces. He ended up being the liaison between the IDF and diaspora Jewry, and then became the leadership director for AIPAC in Israel. Jay's calling in from Boston, where he lives. And we're thrilled to have him too. And then our own Jacob Kornbluh, the Forward senior politics reporter, who came to us in January after several years reporting for Jewish Insider. Jacob is an expert. He lived in Israel and is an expert on Israeli politics as well as American politics, and can tell us all about how this election might affect relationships with the Biden administration, as well as all of the inside baseball about the politicians and their parties. So again, I'm just going to do one more little bit of tachlis. Before you ask, you will get a video of this conversation in your email tomorrow, along with any links that we share in the chat. You will also get a discount subscription offer for The Forward. We hope you'll join us. And if you're not already on our free newsletters, we hope you will join that list as well. We are broadcasting this live on our Facebook page and also on some other Facebook pages, I think, that are connected to the institutions our panelists belong to. Once again, I'm going to just remind you guys one more time. I see a lot of people chatting just to panelists. That means only a few of us can see. please repost your chats to all panelists and attendees. And then again, if you have a question for me to ask the panelists, don't put it in the chat at all, put it in the Q&A. And now, finally, I'm excited to get started. We'll ask Tamar to kick us off by giving us a rundown of what it looks like from a kind of polling and public opinion perspective. What do we think is going to happen tomorrow? How has the polling shifted in the final weeks? And what do we know that might make this election different from the first 3 rounds, as Israel has tried to get a stable government for 2 years? Tamar.
Hi from Israel. I'd like to start by saying that it is a new experience for most Israelis to have, actually to all Israelis, to have 4 elections in 2 years. Certainly, this is something that people find difficult to grasp on the one hand. On the other hand, in fact, this was a 2-year-long election campaign, because from one election to another, we didn't have some time off during which Israelis were not engaged in politics. We had the pandemic, which had a very strong political aspect, because the pro and anti-Netanyahu views regarding his policies during the Corona year were strongly linked to the individual's political positions. So it was a political pandemic in a way, if you wish. Israeli public is highly politicized normally, and is very highly politicized right now, although certain people feel that they are fed up with politics. I should point to a very critical point here, and this is the very low level of trust in political institutions and in the politicians. So when we ask some general questions about the first commitment of a politician as a politician, normally we would get the answers that they care only about their personal agenda, their personal interest, and so on and so forth. People are very skeptical about the desire of, of the politicians to really serve us all. Normally, they would expect a politician to serve his or her own constituency, although, of course, on the theoretical level, they will tell you that they should serve all, but they do not believe that this happens. When we have this scale of trust, on top, we have, as always, the IDF, although there was a slight decline in trust in the IDF as well. But the lowest in our scale are the political parties. 14% say that they trust the political parties. We had the parliament, the Knesset, with 20%, and the government with 25% about. So actually the political bodies are at the bottom of the trust scale in Israel. And this, of course, puts people in a very strange position. Many of them will go tomorrow and vote by the answers, which are normally higher than the actual number of, or the actual turnout. We got something around 80% saying that they were going to vote. We expect to have like 70% amongst the Israeli Jews, maybe a little less, but basically it is the same like last time. And we saw a very disturbing decline in the willingness of the Israeli Arabs to take part in these elections. So on the average, we don't see a huge difference in terms of the expected turnout, but still the fact that the Arabs are quite estranged to what is happening on the political level these days. They are disappointed with both their leaders and, of course, with the government. So they might come in huge numbers in order to express their frustration, but as things stand right now, we expect them to vote less than they did last time.
Thank you, Tamar. Yossi, building off of all those numbers, just tell us what it feels like. You're in Jerusalem. This is the 4th election in 2 years. Is there fatigue? Is there excitement? Is it become deja vu all over again? And does it feel different now? I mean, obviously we're in this pretty interesting stage in the pandemic, which we'll get back to that, but I just would love tell us what it's like there. What does it feel like?
I wouldn't call it excitement. I don't think that people feel uplifted by this election. I don't think we're feeling the thrill of being part of a democratic polity. I think there is fatigue, but what's astonishing to me that people keep showing up. I think that many of us feel that that as long as there's an election, it's my responsibility to show up. I don't know if what I'm going to say is wishful thinking or not, because it's really hard for me to separate what I think is happening from what I hope it is. But I sense a certain shift of energy, of passion from Netanyahu supporters to the anti-Netanyahu campaign. I think that in the anti-Netanyahu campaign, there is a great deal of desperate energy. I know that's how I feel. I dread the coalition that Netanyahu is proposing. It would be the most right-wing, anti-democratic coalition in Israel's history, by far. A coalition of the ultra-Orthodox with parties with the far-right Kahanists, presided over by a politician, three counts of corruption. So we've never had anything like this. So I feel that in the anti-Netanyahu camp, there's a great deal of energy. Again, I may be underestimating the passion in the pro-Netanyahu camp, and I do understand as much as Netanyahu calls me and what he represents, especially in the last few years, what he's turned into, calls me. I understand why many Israelis are tempted to vote for him. It is for me. He did bring Israel. It's an astonishing victory of 2 victories. We lead the world in vaccinations, and we've had 4 peace agreements with Arab countries. The problem is that Netanyahu is also presiding over Israel as a failing state internally. Many of our institutions, government institutions, are functional. And so I worry about the future if he wins, desperately worried. But again, I do understand he's the best we have.
Thanks, Yossi. Jacob, it's always a danger for political reporters to be asked to prognosticate, but I handicapped the situation for us a little bit. You wrote this morning of 4 possible scenarios. The one you put at the top was, I think, the one everyone thinks is most likely, right? Which is that Netanyahu will end up with a similar kind of sort of victory as he's had in the last rounds, eking out a majority, out of some kind of coalition. But give us a couple of insights of what you think might turn out different, or basically what you're watching for as we watch the polls come in tomorrow.
I think I would summarize, which is Tamar and both Yossi are right, which is there's deep distrust in the system, but also people are desperate to see a change. What Netanyahu has the benefit of this time is that he doesn't have a clear alternative. You don't necessarily know if Lapid, who some people might see as qualified to be prime minister, is actually going to end up being prime minister. It might be a rotation between Naftali Bennett, Gideon Sa'ar, and Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid might be the consensus candidate. It might even be that Naftali Bennett would bolt the Netanyahu camp, even if there's 61 with him, and become the compromise candidate for at least 2 years. Or Gideon Sa'ar might take away some Likud members if Netanyahu does not get 61. But what we certainly know is that if Netanyahu gets 61 and Naftali Bennett, based on his performance in recent days, actually joins the Netanyahu bloc, what we're going to get? We're going to get a right-wing government with the religious Zionist parties and the ultra-Orthodox. I mean, it's clear that this would be for the first time, even if it's only 61, that no other party from either center-left or the left would join the Netanyahu government. And I think Netanyahu is less worried about getting to 61 than what happens to the day after, which means he may start panicking tomorrow, 10 p.m., after the exit polls come in and say, wow, what a victory. After 4 elections, Netanyahu actually managed to get a majority of the seats, because he knows with 61, if Itamar Ben-Gvir is in there, if he has the ultra-Orthodox parties, and Naftali Bennett would probably, even if it doesn't get rotation, would probably get a good chunk of the major portfolios in the cabinet, that he won't have anything left for Likud, that he would never, ever be able to both attend the trial unless he actually gets immunity or has some maneuver that just dismantles that whole trial. In the past, what we saw from Netanyahu in 2009, in 2013, and even in 2015, when he negotiated with Buzzi Herzog from the Zionist Union and actually ended up with getting Avigdor Lieberman because he couldn't get the entire Zionist Union bloc on the same page, which is Netanyahu really wants to govern as a moderate, but obviously be the prime minister. And in this time, even if he wins, he's not going to be able to govern. It's not going to be his dream cabinet, but he has no other choice, because if he does not get 61, if he gets 59 or even 60, the only alternative is either another election where there's no possibility that he gets to 61 after 4 attempts. And so it's really unknown what would happen tomorrow night, regardless of what the results are.
Yeah, so as always with Israel, the election is one thing, and then there's phase 2, which is the coalition negotiations. And we've certainly seen over the last 2 years why governing with 61 is not a very safe place to be. The coalition can break up over any number of things. Jay, I want to turn to you and ask you to help us understand what the kind of turmoil in Israeli politics, these repeated elections, and the longevity of Netanyahu, how you think those things have affected the U.S. Israel relationship, and what you're looking for in terms of outcome tomorrow, that might, now with President Trump out of office, President Biden still forming his Middle East team, what do you think the implications will be for potentially changing that dynamic?
So first of all, Jodi, I want to say thank you very much to the Forward to partner with the Ruderman Family Foundation, and it's my honor to be on this panel with Tamar and Yossi and Jacob. First of all, I think we have to start out by saying, the fact is that most American Jews probably are not aware of this election and don't really care about it. But there's some good news. So if you look at some of the polling that we've done in the past, back in January of 2020, we found out that 80% of American Jews have a favorable and support the relationship with Israel, regardless of who's in power. And by the way, there's another poll that we did in November of 2020 that 91% of Israelis believe that Biden will be a good supporter of Israel. So that's, I think, the good news. On a detrimental side, when you have 4 elections in 2 years, set aside the overall American Jewish community, which is a very diverse community and may not be completely represented by American Jewish organizations. But these organizations that do have interface with the Israeli government, with the Prime Minister's office, with different ministries, the constant overturn, I think, sets aside a lot of important programs that the American Jewish community has initiated with the Israeli government, and with different ministers coming in all the time. All of these programs are set aside. I think the other thing to point out is that there's a real difference between the electorate in Israel and the American Jewish community, just in terms of their worldviews. You know, Israel tends to be a center-right country in their worldview, and the American Jewish community happens to be a center-left community. And I think with Trump and Netanyahu wrapping his hands around Trump, and obviously, you know, I think the community in America the Jewish community is very appreciative of recognizing the Golan and moving the embassy, and peace relationships with Arab countries. However, I think Trump and his brand of politics till today, and he's still very involved in Republican politics, most American Jews see as toxic. So that's a factor, although I think, you know, Netanyahu's been around in power for almost 12 years, and I think the American Jewish community is used to him. But there is a split between the worldviews of both communities. And furthermore, I think Yossi brought up, you know, the coalition with potential Haredi parties. Where that becomes problematic is in the internal politics, when certain parties demonize large segments of the Jewish population and will, for example, say Reform Jews are not Jews, are enemies of the Jewish religion, are enemies of the state of Israel. I don't think that's a good strategic move on behalf of Israeli leaders. And in fact, when ministers have made those comments, the prime minister has had to walk those back. So I think we're in a complex period here. And I think, you know, in some ways, the American Jewish community has gotten used to the fact that now we're just constantly in elections until Netanyahu can sort of get the government that he needs in order to move forward.
Or unless he gets out.
Yeah, unless he gets out. So, Yossi, I want to ask you, and I want to ask each of you, because you've all followed the campaign obviously really closely. What one thing, especially after, you know, with this being the 4th round of elections, it's sort of the trying to figure out how the narrative is shifting or not is hard. But I just would love you to tell us about one thing that happened in this campaign that surprised you. What surprised you the most? And as I asked Jacob, what you're watching for. So Yossi, what happened this time that you know made you open your eyes again?
I've been enormously impressed with Yair Lapid of the centrist Yesh Atid party, in the way that he's grown, and he really is a different political leader than he was when he first entered politics. He was young, arrogant. He assumed the position of finance minister without having a clue about the economy, and was a disaster. And
sorry to interrupt you, but I was the bureau chief of the New York Times in Jerusalem when he first ran for office in 2013, and I believe I remember that you have known him quite a long time, and I remember you saying that you were one of the first people to like bring him to the West Bank or introduce him to Palestinians or something like that. Can you remind me and talk a little bit more about what growth you've seen over what's now 8 years in politics? And
yeah, I mean, I you know, no, I don't have that kind of relationship with him. We actually do have a friendship that's more recent, but I have really become a deep admirer of the kind of campaign that he fought. This has been a particularly ugly campaign. Maybe saying particularly ugly is overstating it, because Israeli campaigns going back to the 70s brutal. But there's a meanness. This campaign has been very personal, personally demeaning, and Lapid has really kept to a substantive thing. Really, I would say just almost the only candidate. I mean, Bennett to some extent has come up with policies as well. Netanyahu hasn't bothered letting us know what his policies are, and just trust me. And Lieberman is all about hatred, really, hatred of the Orthodox in the past. It was hatred of Arab Israelis. Lieberman always needs an enemy. And Lapid is really trying to create a different tone, a different quality of Israeli politics that's so dissonant from the rest of what we're hearing. And he has stuck to it. He has not taken the bait. Netanyahu has tried to get under his skin, and Lapid has been steady. He's been angry. He's been very firm. But I think many people have seen a different face Yair Lapid than
Jacob wrote
than
in
we
his
did.
article today that one of the things about Lapid is that he has not framed himself as running for prime minister. And of course, Israel has a parliamentary system, so the head of each party is the number one person on this list of people being elected to the Knesset. It's not a direct election for prime minister the way we vote for president here in America. I remember in that very first campaign, people thought it was quite arrogant of Lapid, who was just emerging on the scene, to imagine himself as a candidate for prime minister. But what is it about that he's not doing that now, and not at all focused on this idea of him as the antidote to Netanyahu in a personal way?
Well, he doesn't have the numbers. It's clear that he's not going to be the prime minister, and it will not sit under a prime minister Lapid. And even if this moderate left to center to right anti-Netanyahu coalition somehow coalesce, Lapid is not going to be the prime minister. So what he's acknowledging here is not necessarily coming from a place of political modesty, although I do think that over the last couple of years, he has shown a very mature approach to politics. He stepped out of the number one position of the centrist opposition and gave that authority to Benny Gantz, who promptly destroyed the center. Benny Gantz is really the great betrayer of, from my point of view, as a former Benny Gantz voter. He's the guy who promised us under no circumstances will I sit in the Netanyahu government, and then turned around and government and created deep cynicism among Israelis, deepened the cynicism that Tamar was talking about. And that, I think, in some ways, is his most unforgivable. So many of us were ready to suspend our skepticism and trust this guy. And in the end, he violated that trust. And it's going to be very hard to convince Israelis to trust the next white hope that comes along.
Tamar, what has been surprising to you in this campaign? Hard-bitten though you are.
The question that I'm being asked the day after each elections, and my permanent answer is that as I'm dealing all the time with Israeli society, I'm not surprised by anything, because otherwise I would have been not so good professionally, but there are two interesting developments. One is the revival of the Labour Party. It was almost, totally dead, formally declared dead, with Amir Peretz joining Netanyahu's coalition, with Itzik Shmuli joining the coalition, and only Meirav Michaeli was left as the main Likud main Labour member of parliament, and she was able to revive the party. Now they are expected to get 6 seats or maybe 7. We don't know yet, but certainly there is a new spirit, new kind of atmosphere, a new kind of vision that is projected by the Labour. And what's so interesting is that we see for the first time ever a huge gender gap around the Labour Party, because it seems that very large number of women are going to vote for Meirav Michaeli, because she's, of course, a feminist, and she declares of her commitment to women's rights and so on and so forth. So Labour Party, which was used to be looked upon as some kind of a dinosaur, is now being looked upon as maybe perhaps a bit too radical to certainly former Labour voters, but also people of the Zionist left, who actually say that there is no big difference between Meretz and Labour. They are actually competing over the same chunk of the Israeli public. So this is number one. And number two is the emergence of Mansour Abbas' party, Ra'am, that actually left the joint list. And he actually signals that he might be open to some very tempting offers by Netanyahu to join his coalition. And this is the first time ever that an Arab leader of this prominence actually is willing. He already cooperated with Netanyahu in the last Knesset on certain issues, but the very fact that he says that he doesn't really say a big no in advance to any such offers made by.
And this move by Abbas, the Arab Israeli lawmaker, to join to align potentially with Netanyahu comes also after Netanyahu has made this strong appeal to Arab voters after only a few years after he, tried to rally his own base by inciting against them. So that's also one of the dynamics of this campaign. Jacob and Jay, quickly, because we have a lot of questions from the audience. So interested if there's one thing that you can point to in the campaign that has surprised you. Jacob?
Yeah, I think that Netanyahu is benefiting less from the diplomatic achievements that he has and more from focusing on domestic issues. In previous elections, him focusing on domestic and economic issues would mean that his opponents would have an upper hand in that election in shaping the narrative. And he obviously had Trump, he had the peace deals, but this time he didn't have. He doesn't have Biden, who doesn't give him any gifts. But also he sort of messed up with the Abraham Accords, with the whole MBZ situation, and focusing right now with the vaccination, but also saying, the same obsession that I had in courting a Pfizer CEO in getting the vaccination, I'll do the same on the economic front. Actually, he's benefiting from focusing on economics rather than diplomats when he has that 30-year experience on that.
Interesting, because that actually goes back to almost his first prime ministership in a way, right? He had a lot of economic achievements way back then. Jay, anything from this campaign that has struck you and surprised you and caught your attention? Or
well, I think one interesting thing is that Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who is a Reform rabbi, is very high up in the labor list and probably has a good chance of getting into the Knesset. which I think will send a huge message to the American Jewish community, where the reform movement is the largest stream of Judaism in the American Jewish community. And to have a reform rabbi there speaking from the plenary with a kippah, I think will have a transformative effect of how American Jews and Reform Jews and Jews who are not Orthodox may feel that they are accepted in the Israeli politics. So I think that that's a very interesting move. I'm sure it's not going to be easy for Gilad to be in the Knesset, but I think that the more certain parties and certain individuals attack him, the more his stature will be raised. So I think that's an interesting
Great
part in
point.
this election.
Just visibility for a reform rabbi in Israel would be a major change in terms of perception. So, all right, I'm going to turn to some of these great questions we have coming in from the audience. I'm going to start with one by Avi Poster, who I think is thinking what a lot of people in our audience is thinking. He says, help, what is the likely center-left coalition? Or he later calls it the alternative to a Bibi coalition. So I don't know who is best to do this, but can we just walk through the scenario in which some other group of people get together and get to 61 before Netanyahu? What is the likely makeup of that coalition, of that anti-Netanyahu coalition? Who wants to jump into that? Jacob?
I can lay out two scenarios. There are two types of coalitions that could be formed. One is obviously if Bibi does not get 61, the anti-Bibi camp gets 61, 62, then sort of they can, number one, swear in a government just to oust Netanyahu. It would be a minority government, but then they change the cards. They just reorganize everything where Netanyahu just moves out from Balfour Street. And then what happens is they come together to agree who the interim prime minister is for the next 6 months, where they actually go for another round of elections, but this time without having Netanyahu on the ballot. The first thing obviously they would do would pass a law which prohibits a candidate who is under trial to run for prime minister. So therefore, Bibi would not be able even to split from Likud and run for prime minister on a new list. That would be the most preferable option if the number one objective is getting rid of Netanyahu. But there's also another scenario, which obviously would be unlikely because of the makeup of, Naftali Bennett, Gideon Sa'ar, and Lapid. They all want to be prime minister. But I can see a scenario where if Netanyahu does not get a majority, that Lapid, Lieberman, Bennett, and Sa'ar sit in one room for a few hours and decide we will sort of agree on a compromise candidate where we first come out as a bloc, say, this is our candidate for prime minister. The four large parties say, this person is our candidate, at least for the first 2 years, and then turn to the ultra-Orthodox and say, right now, we have an option. We either form a government with Meretz, obviously, if they pass the threshold, with Benny Gantz, if he passes the threshold, and with Labor, or we turn to you, and Lapid obviously has matured, as Yossi has said. He might even agree, sort of allowing the ultra-Orthodox, even, with given that their powers would be curtailed, that they would not have the same power than under Netanyahu government. And this would actually be a government that could govern based on the current political system.
But just to be clear, those four, it's hard to imagine those four large parties having enough on their own, Lieberman, Sa'ar, Lapid, and Bennett. So they would either have to make a deal with the left, which would be really anathema to Lieberman and Bennett's positions on the settlements, or with the ultra-Orthodox, which would be really anathema to both Lapid and Lieberman's views on secular versus religious issues. So it is a big leap that you're imagining. Could happen, but there's a lot of ifs and a lot of compromises that it would take, right?
Correct.
Okay. Great. I'm gonna and Tamar or Yossi, you have anything to add to that or clarify to that, or does that feel like the right sketch?
Well, just that the two biggest obstacles are Lieberman will not sit with the ultra-Orthodox, and Bennett will not sit under Lapid. Now, Lapid, in all likelihood, is going to emerge as the largest party among the opposition now. So I don't see how to square that unless there's some kind of complicated rotation agreement that's worked out. Even so, I don't see how Lapid can give up if he really is the largest party. He may be the largest party by far in the anti.
And this is essentially the stalemate that we've been in for 2 years, right? Which is that there's a lot of people who want to get rid of Netanyahu, but they cannot agree either on a fundamental policy question or on who among them should be the number one person, and so they never get over 60.
I'm wondering, Tamar, if I could ask you a question. What are the odds of seeing defections from the Likud to the anti-Netanyahu coalition?
Well, I don't see it happening. Actually, I'm less optimistic that than you that, or actually from Jacob, that these two scenarios are likely to happen. Because to start with, although it is not by the law, surveys results could not be published since Friday. What we do see is that certain Likud voters who opted for the Sar option, assuming that he was going to be the forerunner against Netanyahu, are now going back to Likud. There is a positive momentum amongst Likud traditional voters. And this is actually the only party where we see an increase in the number of people saying that they were going to vote, particularly as Likud voters are very difficult to get them engaged in surveys. They are very skeptical about it, and they prefer not to answer. But as to your question, I don't see any real motivation for anyone to leave Netanyahu under the present situation. I mean, who knows, if something dramatic happens, then there might be some generous offers to some defectors from Likud. But if they wanted to do that, they could do it like Elkin did, or others, or Shasha Bitton. I don't see it happening, and I have to say that this stalemate actually reflects a real division within Israeli, the Israeli public. I mean, we have two blocks. We may call them right and left, but not necessarily right and left in the sense that we used to talk about in the 90s or the early 2000s. This is the liberal not as a compliment, liberal as an ideology, more universalist, people who are more concerned about the democratic nature of Israel, more urban, better off economically, more educated than the average, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, we see the ultra-Orthodox, we see the religious, Zionist religious camp, we see the traditionalist Mizrahi Jews who look up to Netanyahu as the big daddy. And there is this sense of a family there. And one doesn't betray one's family, even if the head of the family misbehaves. The sentiment to protect him from what is being perceived as the attack on him via the judiciary, for example, by the quote unquote old elites may bring back people home to Likud rather than see them leaving Likud.
So one of my challenges moderating panels of Jews is always keeping people's answers tight. I'm going to do a little experiment with what I think is a yes or no question, and just ask all of you to say, put your thumbs up if you, or say yes or whatever. So Robert Fair asks, he says, based on election outcome, will annexation, meaning annexation of the West Bank, be back on the table? Last summer, of course, there was a lot of discussion about possible annexation, and ultimately it was taken off the table as part of the Abraham Accord. So let's start with, if Netanyahu remains prime minister with what you imagine as this new coalition, as you have described, perhaps the most conservative yet, do you each think, and you can nod or shake your head or what, oh, actually, I don't know if we can show you all at once, but do you each think that annexation will be back on the table if Netanyahu remains as prime minister or is reelected? Jacob, yes or no?
No, he doesn't want it.
Yossi, yes or no?
He doesn't want it, but yes, his coalition partners will force him into it.
Tamar?
No, because
No.
of the
Jay?
Biden administration.
Because of the Biden administration. Jay?
Yeah, I would say with Tamar, no. I think that Biden will stop that from happening.
And the alternative coalition, it's quite interesting because, of course, some members of that coalition are more in favor of annexation. Naftali Bennett has been talking about an annexation plan since he first entered politics, but others are more opposed to annexation. So does anybody think that if an anti-Netanyahu coalition takes power, that annexation will be back on the table? No, nobody thinks that. Okay, great. So let's get to some more complicated questions, or at least less straightforward. I'm going to combine two. Ed Foyer is asking, is the real problem Israel's proportional representation electoral system, or what he really means is the parliamentary system, which is guaranteed, he says, to produce political fragmentation and disrespect for democracy? I'm not sure I agree with that, but is the real problem the parliamentary system? And he's asking, why has there been not a real push for change into a system of direct representation or district representation? So he's talking about not just the parliamentary system, but the fact that there are no local districts for representation, but everybody's elected nationally. And then he asks also, how do you say Groundhog Day in Hebrew? So we'll ask if anyone has an answer to that. But I think this combines with Ignat Eisenberg's question, who says, we've observed a fragmentation in Israeli society along many fractured lines over many years and decades, whether it's politics or money, domestic or foreign issues. Is the political system itself in danger? So I guess we can start with Yossi or Tamar about, how Israel, basically the broad question really is, how does Israel's structured system of these elections relate to what people seem to see as fragmentation in society and at least, if not a dysfunction in democracy, at least a stalemate in the democracy?
Tamar?
I can take the unwillingness of the Israelis to change the parliamentary system as it is right now, because certain parties would certainly lose their foothold in the Knesset. Because if you have districts, for example, the ultra-Orthodox will get less than they get now, because the district would be, say, Ramat Gan, Bnei Brak, and Givatayim. Okay, you can't have a district as small as Bnei Brak. So the ability to have as many as representatives as they have now will certainly decline. Certain segments in Israeli society do have an interest to maintain this electoral system, and this is why it is not changed.
I think that as a society of tribes, a coalition system is an accurate reflection of our political will, and it certainly leads to fragmentation, but that is in fact who we are. And so if democracy is supposed to produce a reflection of the society, I think that it's a fairly useful system. I also, quite honestly, looking at the American system, which I was once a very big fan of, I'm not so sure that your system is any more functional than ours. We're all in a mess, really.
Yes. Jacob, do you have any thoughts on the systemic issues since you cover both systems and their dysfunctions so well?
When it comes to Israel, I defer to Yossi and Tamar, obviously, because she's a professional.
I do think it's, I mean, it is one of the ways, Jay, that the whole thing mystifies Americans, right? I mean, it's like, on the one hand, first of all, you just start with the fact that I think there are 13 parties vying for that are, you know, on the ballot this time. So it's a lot to keep track of. What?
24.
24. So 13 who have a chance, is that right?
Yeah.
So 13 who have a chance. Many of them, they all have names that, you know, the same 7 words are used in all of their names in different orders. So it's totally impossible to keep track of them. And on top of that, you know, the results aren't results because we just go into this next phase. So it is, I do think it's one of the many things that makes Americans sort of throw up their hands about trying to follow it, and makes everything, all any American Jew can think about is Netanyahu or not, right? Like that's the.
Well, I do think Yossi makes a good point in that the tribal sort of nature of Israeli society, it does sort of fit Israeli society. I think that the key point here is, as I see it, all of these elections about keeping Netanyahu in power and reworking the numbers, if the numbers can be reworked to give him a more solid government. I think the failure, as I would see, is Likud and Netanyahu not grooming a person to come after him, because no matter how powerful he is, he's a human being and he's not going to live forever. And someone eventually is going to take over after him. Regarding the representation system, yeah, I don't think the American system can be transferred to Israel. Although I would say living in Rehovot for 9 years, and at the time I lived there was no member of Knesset living in Rehovot. I know that's not true now, but in a city of over 100,000 people, when you really don't have anyone that you can turn to and say, he's from my community, that's a little bit problematic.
We are getting close to time, so I'm going to try to get through a couple of these. Eileen Prusher, who's one of our contributing writers, asked a great question about whether there's been a lot of coverage in Israel about how much these elections cost. And I just would like to know, do we know how much each election costs? No? Do people talk about that? Are they concerned that this exercise in democracy is too expensive? Not so much. Yossi's like,
Absolutely.
Hi, Eileen. Nice to hear from you. You know, I don't hear much talk about it. I think this has also been such a peculiar year, and the cost to the economy is I mean, it's significant, but the economic challenges are so overwhelming that
it's like full employment for poll workers, at least.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so Bernard Katz, I think picking up on what you said in the very opening, Yossi, he says, my mishpacha and chaverim, my family and friends in Israel tell me that indications are that the Kahanist party, which he's combined arch-fascist Bezalel Smotrich and chief terrorist Itamar Ben-Gvir, are bound to gain a lot of votes. I wonder if you could talk about like what he's saying, like what would it mean if those parties indeed are in the coalition? And then David Millstone has a different question, but I think it's related. He says, assuming the coalition moves even further to the right, in other words, with those parties, what would be the impact on relations with the Biden administration? So I wonder, Yossi, if you want to start with that. I mean, it would be a significant thing to have, right?
It would be legitimizing theological apocalyptic racism. Kahanism is not a political ideology, and it is, to my mind, the most dangerous theology within Judaism today. And Kahanism, all these years, was beyond the pale. In 1984, when the late Rabbi Meir Kahana was elected to the Knesset, all of one seat, that's all he had. Every time he would get up to speak, Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, the Likud hardline prime minister, would walk out and the entire Likud faction would walk out as well. So Kahana had no legitimacy. And then when he was finally banned 4 years later from running, it was the Likud minister, Don Meridor, who drafted legislation to ban Kahana. So it was the right, it was the mainstream right that didn't want to be sullied by Kahanism. And what Netanyahu has done is, first of all, he's already sullied right. And if God forbid the Kahanist party gets in, he will be sullying the good name of Israel.
So we have only a few minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you, Tamar, you can work that into whatever you next say about this last question too. I just want to pose the last question. And each of you can just kind of wrap up and give your parting thoughts. But Leonard Frankel writes in the Q&A, it sounds like a fifth election is most likely. So let's just have each of you offer your final thoughts, including, do you think we'll just be back here again in some number of months talking about a fifth election? So we'll start with Tamar, and then Jay, then Jacob, and then give Yossi the last word.
Well, hopefully we are not going to have a fifth election, but if we will, then the cleavage that I referred to formerly will stand still. I mean, we will have fifth and sixth and whatever until something really big happens, be it Netanyahu leaving his office for whatever reason, or some legislation that will make it impossible for him to go on, and so on and so forth. But what I wanted to say is who is going to vote for Smotrich and Ben Gvir, okay? Because they didn't have many voters in the past. These are young male ultra-Orthodox voters who became quite frustrated with the leader of Degel Torah, and they are switching to Smotrich and Ben Gvir. And for years, we have been showing with numbers that the ultra-Orthodox community is the most racist, non-liberal, anti-Arab segment of Israeli Jewish society. And here you go. It might well be that if they will get 6 seats or even 7 seats, it will be based on these voters.
Sounds like we've seen that movie before also, so that's a little frightening. Jay, turning to you about a fifth election, or any last thoughts that you have based on the conversation.
Well, I would just say in America, we also have our extremists, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene and others in the QAnon and politicians who are playing around with these conspiracy theories. I mean, you do have you know, people in Congress who are challenging. Regarding Netanyahu, I think you're going to continue to have elections as long as he decides he wants to be in power, and he will do anything to be in power. And if that means another election because he'll get a more favorable coalition, I think you're going to see more elections.
Jacob?
As much as I like elections, I think there won't be a fifth election. My prediction is that Bibi gets 61 with Bennett, but even if he falls short, that the next election will probably be in 2022.
Excellent. And before I hand it to Yossi for the last word, I just want to thank again the Ruderman Family Foundation for co-sponsoring this, Gabby Brooks and Lisa Lepson for putting it together and hosting it. Our captioner, Tracy Steele, we're so happy to have you with us. And just a reminder, you will get in your email tomorrow, I believe, a video of this program, links, and an offer, subscription offer. You can also watch your email for our future events. We have one tomorrow, interviewing the filmmakers of a documentary about Streit's matzah. So if you're preparing for Passover, you might want to tune into that. All of this can be found at forward.com. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great conversation, and I'm going to hand it to Yossi to have the last word.
Well, you know, Jodi, I don't trust my prophetic capabilities. I was sure that there wouldn't be a third election, and a fourth election was just inconceivable. What are we, insane? A fourth election in the middle of COVID? So here we are. I think that if there is going to be any surprise backlash against Netanyahu. It will be on the issue that we skirted but haven't talked about, which is the deep and growing rage among many Israelis toward the ultra-Orthodox parties. And this is the unknown factor, or one of the unknown factors in Israeli politics. And I see that rage. It is seething. The question is whether it's going to be translated into an anti-Netanyahu backlash. And that for me is really the issue that I'll be watching most.
Thank you. We will be watching it as well. Good luck tomorrow in your very practiced electioneering, and we'll be eager to hear and read what you both have to say afterwards. Jay, Jacob, thank you also for joining us, and thanks to the audience. I'm Jodi Rudoren of The Forward. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.